exhausted from the hospital. Elena found Matteo handing the trust to the blonde in the nursery. She dropped her suitcase, removed her ring, set it on the payment ledger. "Before you replace me," read the first name. The guard had been buried 11 months. Yet Matteo's private code paid him that morning. Matteo reached for the ledger and stopped. He had discarded the woman holding his deadliest secret. Matteo's hand remained suspended over the ledger. Elena did not move the folder closer. "Outside counsel has an encrypted copy," she said, answering the question in his eyes before Vivian could. "They cannot read it without my release key. But they can prove when I exported it." Behind him, one of the security men shifted toward her suitcase. Elena wrapped her fingers around the handle. "If anyone touches this bag without signing custody, the proof becomes easier to attack. Decide whether you want the truth or a cleaner lie." Matteo lowered his hand. "Nobody touches the bag." His voice cut across the nursery. But Elena heard the delay before the order. 3 seconds earlier, he had been ready to let Vivian take the trust system Elena had built. Now he studied the first line of the ledger as if the dead guard's name might change under pressure. Carlo Bianchi. Burial benefit paid 11 months ago. Emergency stipend approved at 6:42 that morning. Matteo's private authorization code appeared beside it. Vivian stepped away from the doorway and folded her arms. A duplicate record is not a conspiracy. Elena just left the hospital. She needs rest, not an audience. On the dresser, Elena's black access badge lay beside a folded discharge envelope. The security chief had taken it from her at the nursery door while 2 younger guards watched. For 7 years, that badge had opened the office where she corrected, denied claims at midnight, and found missing wages before dock workers knew they were missing. Vivian had received an identical badge that morning after one briefing and a borrowed checklist. Elena had not raised her voice then. She had carried the suitcase inside, listened to Matteo call the transfer temporary, and understood that the system had finally priced her exactly as the family always had useful. Invisible. Replaceable. Elena placed the ledger on top of the black suitcase, but kept one palm over the security strip. A duplicate record repeats a beneficiary number. This one repeats a dead man's identity and routes the money to a new vendor. She pointed to the sequence without sliding the page toward them. The system should have rejected it at 3 separate gates. It did not. That means the beneficiary status was changed. The vendor was approved, and the dead account safeguard was disabled. Matteo looked at the hospital band around her wrist, then at Vivian. Who had authority while she was admitted? Vivian's expression remained smooth. "You did. I only supervised routine approvals under your instructions." "That answer is incomplete," Elena said. Matteo's gaze snapped back to her, but she did not soften the words. "You gave Vivian temporary authority. You gave your chief counsel emergency override. You gave security permission to reset locked credentials. And you removed my alert access yesterday afternoon." She lifted her phone and showed the gray login screen. "I could still export a final ledger because I wrote a delayed audit window into the system 5 years ago. No one knew about it because no one ever asked how the trust survived 3 previous breaches." The nearest guard looked away. Matteo did not. For the first time that morning, he was not looking at her as his wife or as a patient who had ignored medical advice. He was looking at the person who understood the machinery beneath his name. Vivian crossed the room and stopped beside the crib. "This is exactly why Matteo relieved you. You hide controls from the family, then appear with a crisis only you can solve." Elena turned one page. 47 lines carried the same morning date. I did not create these payments. I preserved the record of them. She tapped the total at the bottom. $18,600,000. The batch releases at midnight. If Matteo freezes the entire trust, 612. Real families lose medical payments, payroll support, and widow benefits. If he does nothing, these 47 transfers disappear into shell vendors before breakfast. Matteo reached for his phone. Elena stopped him with one sentence. Do not call the bank until you decide who is authorized to speak. A confused instruction will trigger a full compliance hold. The warning landed harder than a threat. Matteo set the phone on the dresser instead of dialing. Then tell me the first move. Elena held his gaze. Restore read-only access to me. Suspend every temporary approver, including Vivian. Put 2 witnesses on this room and record every instruction. Then call the bank's fraud officer from a clean line. Vivian gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You are asking him to hand control back to you after you walked in threatening divorce. Elena looked down at the ring resting on the ledger. The ring is personal. The batch is not. Matteo took a slow breath and ordered security to seal the nursery. But before anyone reached the door, his phone lit with an incoming call from DeLuca Trust Banking. The screen displayed one-line payment 1 settled. Matteo answered on speaker before the second ring. The fraud officer identified herself, confirmed the security phrase, and asked why a payment to Carlo Bianchi had cleared from a deceased beneficiary account. Vivian's face lost color for less than a second. Elena noticed because she had spent years watching people react to numbers they claimed not to understand. Matteo asked whether the transfer could be reversed. Not without a formal fraud declaration. The officer said, and that declaration will place the full trust under review unless your operations director isolates the affected batch. Matteo looked at Elena. The title he had erased 20 minutes earlier had just become the bank's condition for action. My access was revoked, Elena said. She kept her tone even, but the words forced the room to face what Matteo had done. The officer paused. Then your exposure is larger than one payment. We have 46 additional instructions queued under the same authorization family. Matteo's hand closed around the phone. Do not release them. I cannot accept that command verbally. The officer replied. The trust agreement requires either the operations director's authenticated intervention or a total freeze. Elena opened the ledger to the validation page. A total freeze will stop a pediatric surgery authorization at noon and 3 payroll bridges by 4. The officer confirmed each item. Vivian muttered that temporary hardship was better than theft. Elena turned toward her. It is easy to call 600 families temporary when none of them know your name. Matteo ended the call only after securing a 30-minute review window. Then he faced the security chief. Restore Elena's read-only credentials. Suspend every temporary token. The chief hesitated, including Ms. Rizzo's. Matteo's eyes stayed on Elena. Including everyone's. Vivian stepped forward. You cannot humiliate me because she brought in an unverified printout. Elena unlocked the suitcase herself and removed a slim authentication key sealed in clear evidence wrap. She did not hand it to Matteo. This key verifies the ledger hash. The bank can compare it without seeing my release code. 2 witnesses sign before the seal is opened. Matteo motioned to the dresser. Write the chain. His order was brief, but it was the first action that followed Elena's procedure rather than his pride. While the guards documented the seal, Elena sat in the chair beside the crib. A cramp tightened low across her abdomen, sharp enough to steal half a breath. She rested one hand against the armrest until it passed. Matteo moved toward her. then stopped before touching her. "Do you need the hospital? I need the room to stay focused." Her answer held no invitation. He nodded once and stepped back. Vivian watched the exchange with a look that mixed calculation and resentment. "This is reckless," she said. "She should not be working in her condition." Elena raised her wrist. The hospital band bright against the blue cardigan. "My doctor restricted stress. He did not transfer my judgment to you." The restored login appeared on Elena's phone with a red banner across the screen. "Read only emergency session." She entered the ledger reference, matched the authentication hash, and opened the batch map. The first payment had settled. The remaining 46 sat in 3 clusters, designed to look unrelated. Elena traced the routing numbers. Vendor, ages, and beneficiary edits. "These are not random thefts," she said. "Someone grouped real obligations around false ones, so a full freeze would punish the families and make the fraud politically expensive to investigate." Matteo leaned over the dresser, careful not to cross into her space. "Can you separate them?" "Yes, but not as your wife, and not under revoked authority. I need written control of this audit, independent custody of the proof, and the right to stop any order that touches the trust until midnight." Vivian shook her head. "She is exploiting a crisis to seize power." Matteo looked at the ring, then at the payment map. "No, I created the crisis when I removed the one person who understood the controls. The admission did not repair anything, but it changed the room." He ordered counsel to draft emergency authority in Elena's professional name. With 2 independent witnesses and no family override, Elena read every line before signing. She crossed out a clause that allowed Matteo to reclaim control for security reasons. He did not argue. When the document was complete, she isolated the first false transfer and protected the surgery payment behind it. A green confirmation appeared. Partial success. Then a second alert opened beneath it. Dead account safeguard disabled. 317A. M. Matteo De Luca hardware token. Elena looked up from the screen. "Your code was not copied," she said. "Someone used the physical token inside this house." The words changed the room at once. Matteo looked toward the hallway. Then, at the locked nursery door. "The token never left my study," he said. Elena answered within 2 breaths. "Then, whoever used it either entered your study or convinced the system that they did." She rotated the phone so the access trail faced him. The token handshake had originated from the villa's east terminal at 317A. M. But the device log showed Matteo's office computer asleep at that hour. Vivian moved first. "This is absurd." Elena had access to every room before she went to the hospital. She could have staged that trail herself. Elena did not react to the accusation. She enlarged the timestamp and pointed to the terminal ID. "The East Terminal is not in Matteo's study. It is in the charitable trust office beside this nursery." Matteo turned to Vivian. "You used that office last night." Her chin lifted. "I reviewed donor files until midnight. That does not make me a thief." She stepped closer to him and lowered her voice, but not enough to hide the strategy. She arrived from the hospital with a prepared ledger, a divorce threat, and a story that places the blame inside this house. You know what the doctor said about stress. You know how frightened she has been. Elena closed the screen. "Do not use my medical record as an argument against my competence." Vivian gave her a look of practiced sympathy. "I am trying to protect you." "No," Elena said. You are trying to turn a temporary medical condition into permanent control. The security chief received a message and glanced down. Mr. De Luca. Counsel is asking whether Mrs. De Luca is fit to direct an emergency audit. Elena knew the wording before he finished. Fit. Not qualified. Not authorized. Fit. Vivian had chosen a frame that required no proof. Only discomfort. Matteo asked who had raised the question. The chief hesitated. Councilman Ferraro. He says several members were told Mrs. De Luca left the hospital against advice. Elena opened her discharge envelope and removed the signed instructions. 48 hours of monitoring. No bed rest order. No finding that I lacked capacity. My physician recommended reduced stress and independent decision-making. She handed the page to the nearest witness. Not to Matteo. Read the last line aloud. The guard did. Patient retains full authority over employment. Inons. Residence. And medical consent. Matteo's face remained still. But his next order changed the balance. Send that sentence to counsel. Nothing else from her medical file leaves this room. Vivian folded her arms. You are letting her turn a family emergency into a public performance. Elena reopened the batch map. It became public when someone told the council I was unstable before anyone asked what the ledger showed. She isolated the East Terminal access record. The login belonged to a generic charity profile Vivian's office used for donor acknowledgements. That account could not approve payments. Jättat harumtisenedjo. It had requested a privilege escalation under Matteo's hardware token. 6 minutes later. The dead account safeguard went dark. Matteo ordered the East office sealed. Vivian protested. The donor records inside were confidential. Elena looked at him. If you let anyone enter before the terminal is imaged, the access contradiction disappears. For 1/10 second, he weighed Vivian's status against Elena's procedure. Then he told security to lock the office and post 2 men outside. Vivian's composure cracked at the edges. This is what she wanted. You remove me. Restore her. And suddenly she has the power to accuse anyone. Elena stood, slower than she wished, and slipped the authentication key back into the suitcase. No. I have the power to preserve a record. The record decides who it accuses. Her phone vibrated. The caller ID showed St. Catherine Medical Center. She nearly ignored it. Then answered, because the hospital's compliance officer had helped authenticate the trust's emergency payment records for years. Instead, the woman offered Elena a position. Vice President of Benefits Integrity, Independent Security, assigned relocation package, and authority over a team that would report only to the hospital board. We heard your trust access was suspended while you were admitted. The officer said, Our offer does not depend on what happens in that house. You can start Monday. Elena looked at the ring on the ledger. Then at Matteo. Send the contract to my lawyer. She said, not to the De Luca office. Matteo heard every word. He did not interrupt. But his expression shifted when Elena ended the call. She closed the suitcase and set the ring inside a separate pocket. I have a viable exit now, she said. That means every decision I make here is voluntary. Before Matteo could answer, the security chief's radio snapped to life. A second voice reported movement near the East office. Someone inside had just tried to remotely erase the terminal. Matteo reached the hallway first. But Elena stopped at the nursery threshold. Do not open that office yet. The guards turned toward her instead of him. If the erase command is still active, Opening the door could cut power to the terminal or trigger a failsafe. We need the network isolated before anyone touches the lock. Matteo held up one hand, freezing the team. Elena called the bank fraud officer and asked for the Villa terminal's outbound session to be mirrored. While the officer worked, the security chief ordered the house network segmented. The erase attempt failed at 92%. Enough remained to identify a command path, but not enough to show the full user history. Vivian came into the hall with her phone in hand. This is becoming dangerous. Council just ordered security to take the ledger into central custody. A guard stepped toward Elena's suitcase. Elena did not back away. Show me the order. He held up a message bearing Council's name and the De Luca seal. Matteo glanced at it. It looks valid. Elena read the routing header and felt the first real cost of the morning. The directive had been sent through the internal legal channel. The same channel that carried authentic custody commands. If she resisted without proof, Vivian could say she was obstructing the council. If she surrendered the suitcase, the only readable main proof would leave her control. Ask council to confirm by voice, Elena said. The guard dialed. No answer. Vivian's tone sharpened. You cannot invent a new rule every time authority moves against you. Elena pointed to the message footer. Council's office signs emergency custody orders with a 6-digit witness code. This has 5. Matteo looked closer. The final line also used yesterday's seal version, replaced after a routine security update at noon. Forged, he said. The guard lowered his hand. Elena's relief lasted less than a second. A second message arrived. This one, ordering her detention for interference with trust assets. Matteo took the guard's phone and read it. Who controls the legal channel? The chief answered. Council. 2 senior clerks. And emergency administration. Vivian said nothing. Elena opened the ledger to the custody history and placed her own signature beneath the last witness line. Someone is not only stealing money, they are testing which orders this house obeys without verification. She looked directly at Matteo. That is how a coup begins in a system built on fear. Not with guns. With familiar signatures and tired men who stop asking questions. The mirrored session returned from the bank. The erase command had originated from a mobile device connected to the villa's guest network, then bounced through the legal channel. The device identifier was hidden, but the connection point sat within 20 feet of the East office. Matteo ordered every phone in the hall surrendered for examination. Vivian held hers tighter. You cannot search my private messages. I can suspend network access. Elena said, you can keep the phone, but it stays offline. Vivian looked to Matteo. He nodded. Do it. She powered down the device with careful hands and passed it to a guard. But Elena noticed the delay before the screen went dark. Inside the sealed office, the terminal monitor still showed a partial erase window. Elena entered with 2 witnesses, Matteo and the security chief. Vivian remained outside under protest. The room smelled faintly of overheated plastic. A donor file lay open on the desk, but the chair was tucked in too neatly for someone who had fled in a hurry. Elena photographed the screen, the cable positions, and the hardware token cradle. The cradle was empty. Matteo touched the place where the token should have been. It was here yesterday. Elena checked the device log. Not anymore. The system recorded removal at 2:58 a.m., 19 minutes before the safeguard was disabled. A young guard found a thin strip of clear evidence tape beneath the desk. It bore the number from Elena's authentication kit. Vivian had access to those supplies through the trust office. But so did 3 clerks and security administration. Elena refused the easy conclusion. This proves someone used my custody materials. It does not prove who. Matteo looked at her as if he expected anger to choose for her. She gave him procedure instead. Bag it. Log it. No names until the chain supports them. Then the bank officer called again. The 30-minute review window had collapsed. Someone had filed a competing authorization from central administration, moving the batch release forward to 9 p.m. Elena checked the clock. They had lost 3 hours. Worse. The bank now required in-person verification from the operations director at its Manhattan office before it would accept a selective freeze. Matteo said he would take her under guard. Elena closed the ledger. I will go with independent hospital security. Not yours. His face tightened. But he did not object. As they stepped back into the hall, Vivian was gone. And so was Matteo's missing hardware token. Vivian's absence changed the search from internal review to active containment. Matteo ordered the gates closed. But Elena stopped him before the first vehicle was blocked. Do not turn this house into a cage, because one person left with a token, she said. Record the exits. Preserve the cameras. And notify the bank. No one gets detained without evidence. He stared at her for a moment, then amended the order exactly as she had directed. 10 minutes later, 2 security officers from St. Fote, Catherine Medical Center, arrived with the hospital compliance officer. Elena placed the suitcase in their custody, signed the transfer, and kept the ledger seal in her own hand. Matteo rode in a separate car behind them. He did not argue. But every mile to Manhattan made the distance between husband and wife look more official. The first attack arrived before they crossed the river. Councilman Ferraro called an emergency session and demanded that Elena surrender the trust records. His voice came through the car speaker, sharp with practiced outrage. You removed confidential assets from a DeLuca residence, demanded authority, and abandoned the family, while 600 beneficiaries are at risk. Elena watched the skyline approach through the rain-streaked window. I preserved an authenticated ledger after my access was revoked. I requested the minimum authority required by the trust agreement. The beneficiaries are at risk because someone advanced a corrupted batch. Ferraro ignored the distinction. Mrs. DeLuca. Are you threatening to withhold payments unless the council gives you control? No, she said. I am refusing to let you call procedure extortion because it came from a woman you usually introduce by her husband's name. Another councilman joined the call and asked whether Elena had taken pain medication at the hospital. The question was designed to sound responsible. It also gave every man on the line permission to doubt her without discussing a single number. Elena muted the speaker and looked at the compliance officer. Please record that they are asking about my medical treatment before reviewing the ledger. The officer nodded and began a formal note. Matteo's voice came from the second vehicle through the conference line. Her medical condition is not before the council. Ferraro answered. Your judgment is. You gave her emergency control while emotionally compromised. Elena heard the cost in Matteo's silence. If he defended her as his wife, they would call it weakness. If he defended her as operations director, he had to admit he had removed the one officer the bank still recognized at the Manhattan branch. The fraud officer met them in a glass conference room below the main trading floor. Elena inspected the seal, verified the ledger hash, and matched Carlo Bianchi's death record to the payment instruction. The proof held. The officer entered a selective freeze request, but the system rejected it. Central administration had submitted a council resolution removing Elena as operations director at 8:04 that morning, 16 minutes before Matteo signed her emergency authority. The bank now has conflicting governance documents, the officer said. Until they are resolved, we can only freeze the entire trust. Elena checked the live obligations. A child's cardiac procedure, 2 trauma surgeries, and the port payroll bridge would all fail within hours. Vivian had built the trap well. Any move that protected the money would hurt innocent families, and every injured family would become evidence that Elena had taken the trust hostage. Matteo entered the room with his counsel on speaker. Who filed the resolution? Counsel hesitated. Council administration. It bears your digital approval. Elena asked for the timestamp. 7:58 a.m. Matteo had been standing in the nursery, watching her remove her ring. His hardware token had already been missing. The forged resolution had not only removed Elena, it had placed Vivian Rizzo as acting operations director with authority to approve emergency payments. Matteo's face hardened. But Elena kept the room on the document. Do not accuse her yet. Authenticate the submission route. Compare the token handshake. And preserve the bank copy. Ferraro interrupted through the conference line. This is getting theatrical. Vivian has served this family for 20 years. Elena walked out with proprietary records and now asks us to believe everyone but her is corrupt. Elena turned the camera toward the ledger's first page. Then vote on evidence. Confirm whether Carlo Bianchi died 11 months ago. Confirm whether Matteo stood beside me at 6:42 this morning. Confirm whether this bank received a payment carrying his private code at that exact minute. No one answered the third question. The fraud officer did. Yes, all 3 facts are verified. A second alert appeared across her screen. The corrupted batch had been accelerated again. Release was now set for 7:30 p.m. The final same-day clearing window. They had less than 2 hours. Then, the doors opened, and 3 DeLuca security men entered with a valid council custody order for Elena's suitcase. Elena did not reach for the suitcase. She placed both hands flat on the table and asked the lead guard to read the order aloud. The document was genuine this time. It named the ledger a family asset, directed immediate transfer to central administration, and authorized force if the holder resisted. The officers stepped forward, but Elena raised one finger. No confrontation. We follow the chain. She asked the bank to scan the order, preserve the delivery footage, and identify the receiving officer by name. The guard gave it. Then Elena asked who would sign at central administration. He glanced at Matteo instead of answering. That hesitation told her the order was valid in form and empty in custody. Ferraro appeared on the conference screen with Vivian seated beside him. She wore the same champagne dress from the nursery and looked composed enough to suggest she had never run. There is no reason for this drama, Vivian said. Return the ledger. Allow the trust to freeze, and let the council repair the damage after Elena rests. Elena studied the screen. Vivian's phone was visible on the desk. Powered on despite the network suspension Matteo had ordered. Where is the hardware token? Matteo asked. Vivian looked hurt rather than surprised. You cannot seriously believe I stole from you. Ferraro Cutin. Matteo. This obsession is weakening your position. Sign the custody transfer. Remove Elena. And the council will treat this as a domestic failure instead of a leadership crisis. There it was. Status offered in exchange for a lie. Matteo could preserve his authority by calling Elena unstable, surrendering the proof, and letting Vivian's council allies control the investigation. Elena did not ask him to choose her. The bank needs governance clarity, not loyalty, she said. State who had authority, who lost it, and why. Put your own error into the record. Matteo looked at the council screen, then at the wedding ring sealed in the suitcase pocket. When he spoke, his voice was steady. I revoked Elena's access without an operational review. I gave Vivian temporary authority because I trusted history over controls. I approved no resolution removing Elena, and any document bearing my code this morning was unauthorized. Ferraro warned him that the statement could trigger a confidence vote. Then record that too, Matteo said, by admitting his error. Matteo stripped the council of its easiest excuse and exposed himself to removal. He ordered his security men to stand down and transferred custody jurisdiction to the bank until the audit ended. When Ferraro challenged the transfer, Matteo answered, "Central administration is inside the breach." He signed a written recusal from every trust decision until the false authorizations were isolated. Then he named Elena emergency audit director under the independent clause she had written years earlier. The clause required bank oversight, outside counsel, and 2 non-family witnesses. No De Luca officer, including Matteo, could overrule her before the clearing window closed. Elena read the document twice. Add that my authority ends when I choose, not when you decide I am calm enough. Matteo added the sentence. Add independent transport and no surveillance of my residence. He added that too. Vivian leaned toward the camera. She is using your guilt to dismantle the family. Elena Metterhase. No. I am removing a system where one man's token can move $18 million and one council rumor can erase the person who notices. The bank officer opened a secure audit room. Elena carried the ledger inside with the hospital compliance officer and outside counsel. Matteo remained behind the glass. His role was no longer to command the work, only to keep others from interrupting it. The authenticated ledger showed that the 47 false beneficiaries were not simply clustered by vendor. Each vendor had paid consulting retainers to people connected to an upcoming succession vote. Elena mapped the transfers across the screen. 7 council households, 3 port captains, 2 legal clerks, 1 security administrator. Vivian did not need to buy the entire family. She only needed enough people to question Matteo's judgment when the batch failed, and enough desperate beneficiaries to blame Elena for the freeze. Matteo watched the network take shape and said nothing until Elena invited him to speak. This was never just theft, he said. It was a replacement plan. Elena corrected him. It still is. A plan does not stop because we finally understand it. The fraud officer isolated 39 false payments, but 8 were wrapped around genuine medical obligations and could not be separated without the original token sequence. The missing hardware token was now more than evidence. It was the only clean way to release the real payments before 730. At chasse 58. The bank received a video call from an unknown number. Vivian's face disappeared from the council screen at the same moment. On the new call, a gloved hand held Matteo's token above a metal shredder, and a distorted voice said, "Restore Vivian's authority, or the families Elena claims to protect lose everything." The distorted voice finished its demand, and Elena answered before Matteo could. No authority gets restored under threat. Keep the line open and record the token's movement. The gloved hand hesitated above the shredder. Whoever stood behind the camera expected panic. not procedure. Elena asked the bank officer to compare the token's live signature with the one used at 317 that morning. The officer confirmed a match. Matteo leaned toward the microphone. But Elena raised her palm. "This is my audit." He stepped back. Elena studied the background, a stainless work table, a green safety stripe, and amber light reflected in the shredder housing. The caller is inside a regulated document destruction room. Vivian reappeared on the council screen and claimed she had lost her connection. Elena asked the bank to display Vivian's connection history beside the unknown caller's route. Both signals had passed through the same private relay within 11 seconds. It was not proof that Vivian held the token, but it destroyed her claim that the calls were unrelated. Matteo's counsel identified 3 destruction facilities approved by the trust. Elena checked the vendor ledger and found one had received a consulting retainer from a company tied to Ferraro's nephew. "Send city police and the bank's investigators," she said. Matteo's security chief offered his own men. Elena refused. "The people who compromised your channels do not get first access to the scene." The caller lowered the token closer to the blades. "You have 10 minutes. Elena noticed a square indentation on the left thumb where a heavy signet ring had been removed. Ferraro wore one in every council meeting. She did not accuse him. Instead, she asked whether the 8 legitimate obligations could be released through manual beneficiary verification. The fraud officer said yes. But each family needed identity, confirmation, and direct consent before the clearing window. Elena divided the calls among the hospital compliance team, outside counsel, and bank officers. No, De Luca, staff. No one tells a family what answer to give. Matteo watched through the glass as she rebuilt the payment path without his token. The choice cost him more than control. Every successful verification proved that the trust had depended on Elena's judgment long before anyone had called it authority or leadership. The first family confirmed a surgery payment. A widow authorized a direct transfer. The caller moved the token another inch toward the shredder. Elena verified names, dates of birth, claim numbers, and destination accounts. The process exposed why her invisible labor mattered. Each file carried a detail. No checklist contained a daughter who translated for her father, a widow who used her maiden name at the bank, a dock worker whose son's treatment was billed under an alias for privacy. Vivian had copied columns. Elena knew the people behind them. 7 payments were clean. The 8th beneficiary did not answer. Matteo's counsel found the final family at an emergency clinic in Queens. Elena reached the mother with 4 minutes left. "Your son's care will not be used as leverage," she said. "I need your consent to move the payment outside the corrupted batch." The mother gave it. The bank released all 8 obligations at 728. The caller dropped the token into the shredder. But the machine never started. Police entered before the glove reached the switch. The video tilted and showed Ferraro's signet ring in an evidence tray and Vivian's gold phone on the work table. Ferraro's counsel feed went dark. Vivian remained visible for 1 second longer, then stood so quickly her chair struck the wall. Matteo ordered the exits monitored. But he looked to Elena before going further. "What do you require?" She closed the last beneficiary file. "Preserve the scene. Suspend everyone tied to the relay. And let civil authorities handle the arrests. No private punishment." He agreed. Then Elena opened the hospital contract and signed the acceptance. "I start Monday. Tonight I leave the villa." Matteo did not challenge her. In front of the bank officer, outside counsel, and the hospital compliance chief. He signed a release drafted by Elena's lawyer. It waived any claim over her residence, employment, travel, medical decisions, devices, and security arrangements. It prohibited tracking without consent and stated that her emergency audit authority remained hers until she resigned it in writing. Elena read every line and sent the document to independent counsel. The freedom was real. As she lifted the suitcase, the bank officer opened one final recovered file. The corrupted ledger was only half of Vivian's plan. At 9 the next morning, the council intended to vote Matteo out and use Elena's departure as proof that his own house no longer trusted him. Elena read the recovered agenda twice. The vote was scheduled, the proxies distributed, and the accusation already written Matteo had endangered 600 families, concealed his wife's instability, and surrendered control under emotional pressure. Her departure would complete the picture. Matteo asked whether she would postpone leaving until after the vote. No, Elena said. My freedom cannot depend on whether your counsel behaves. She handed the agenda to outside counsel. I will finish the audit from the hospital's secure office, and I will appear if the evidence requires it. That is a professional decision, not a marital one. Matteo accepted the boundary. He arranged no escort and issued no private order. Hospital security drove Elena to a furnished apartment near St. Foot, Catherine, where her new employer had delivered credentials and a temporary workstation. For the first time in years, no one outside her door answered to Matteo. Elena placed the ring in a small envelope and called her lawyer. The release was enforceable, the employment contract complete, and the apartment secure. She could walk away from the DeLuca Trust with income, housing, protection, and no unpaid obligation. She sat in the quiet long enough for the choice to become real. Then she opened the ledger again, not for Matteo, not for the marriage, for the families whose names had been used as camouflage. The recovered files contained proxy agreements, consulting contracts, and draft statements for the morning vote. Vivian's network planned to blame the freeze on Elena, remove Matteo, then appoint Ferraro as interim head, while Vivian took permanent control of the trust. The scheme depended on Elena either disappearing in anger or returning in loyalty. Both versions made her a supporting character in someone else's struggle. She chose a third position. She would present the proof, define the remedy, and leave every personal decision outside the council room. At 10:40 propri. M. Matteo called through her lawyer rather than directly. The council moved the meeting to 7. He said, Ferraro's allies are trying to destroy records. Issue a preservation order through the bank and city investigators. Do not send your men. He had already done so. After a pause, he asked, Will you come? Elena looked at the hospital contract beside the ledger. I will come for the people whose payments they weaponized. I will not stand beside you as proof that our marriage survived. Matteo answered quietly. Understood. He did not mention the ring. He asked what role he should take. Recuse yourself from the trust vote. Guarantee I speak without interruption. Nothing more. By midnight, Elena had mapped the influence network. Dead beneficiaries funded shell vendors. The vendors paid consultants. The consultants purchased proxy commitments. Every line returned to the same approval family. But the sequence showed different levels of knowledge. Some council members had knowingly sold votes. Others believed they were accepting legitimate succession support. Elena separated corruption from carelessness because collapsing them together would make the innocent defend the guilty. She prepared 4 sections verified loss: access path, voting influence, and structural repair. No confession was needed. The ledger could speak if the room followed its order. At 6:20 the next morning, Elena entered DeLuca headquarters through the public lobby with hospital security and outside counsel. She wore a charcoal suit over a white blouse. Her hospital band had been removed but preserved because Vivian had used the admission to frame her. Matteo waited beyond the security gate and did not approach until she nodded. He handed her a signed recusal and a written order giving her uninterrupted presentation time. She read both before moving. No private promise replaced a document. Inside, the council chamber. Ferraro's chair stood empty, but his allies filled the right side of the table. Vivian sat with counsel in a dark suit, trying to replace scandal with seriousness. She looked at Elena's bare hand and smiled as though departure proved defeat. Councilman Russo asked whether Elena appeared as Matteo's wife or as an employee seeking revenge. Elena placed the authenticated ledger at the center of the table. Neither. I appear as the audit director you attempted to erase, and as the person who kept your families paid while you debated whether I was emotional. Matteo closed the doors and sat behind the observers. Outside the voting circle, Elena displayed Carlo Bianchi's name. Before anyone discusses leadership, each person will answer one question in sequence. Did you know this man was dead when money was sent in his name? Vivian's counsel rose to object. Elena pressed the first timestamp onto the screen. Then the display changed by itself. Someone inside the building had activated a remote purge, and the evidence clock began counting down from 60 seconds. The 60-second clock began to fall, and Elena did not touch the keyboard. Nobody disconnects anything, she said. The purge is an access event. Let it identify itself. Matteo stayed behind the observers as promised. Outside, counsel opened the bank mirror on a separate laptop, while the hospital compliance officer started a fresh witness record. At 48 seconds, Elena ordered the council display isolated from the building network, but kept the hostile session alive inside a monitored sandbox. The evidence screen went black at 31. The authenticated ledger did not. Its hash remained intact at the bank, and the encrypted copy held by outside counsel matched the export time from the nursery. Elena turned the failed purge into a new line on the access trail. Whoever launched this knew the meeting started early. Vivian's counsel demanded a recess. Elena refused. A recess gives the attacker time to change devices. She asked each council member to place phones, tablets, and hardware tokens on the table. Then sign the witness sheet before touching anything again. 2 men protested that she had no authority over personal property. Elena pointed to the emergency audit order. You may keep your device. You may also leave. But if you remain while trust evidence is under attack, your connection becomes part of the chain. Un by un. The devices came forward. Vivian placed her phone down last. The screen was dark, but the bank mirror showed a relay session transmitting through a secondary eSIM. Elena asked the bank officer to preserve the identifier and compare it with the call that had displayed Matteo's token. The routes shared the same relay account. Elena reopened the ledger on the offline laptop and began with Carlo Bianchi. She asked the council to confirm the death record. Then, the payment time. Then the authorization family. Each answer came from a different witness. No one could dismiss the pattern as her interpretation, because she made the room build it aloud. From Carlo's payment, she followed the vendor destination. From the vendor, She followed the consulting retainer. From the retainer, she followed a proxy agreement, signed 3 days before the succession vote. 7 council households appeared across the map. But Elena separated the people who had accepted legal consulting work from those who had sold their votes. Carelessness is not conspiracy, she said. Blur them together, and the guilty hide inside the frightened. Vivian rose. This ledger proves payments moved. It does not prove I ordered them. Elena nodded. Correct. That is why I did not begin with your name. She displayed the privilege escalation from the charity terminal. The missing token sequence. The forged resolution naming Vivian Acting Operations Director. And the relay account that linked the token video to Vivian's council connection. Supporting records authenticated each point. But the payment ledger remained the spine. Vivian's counsel argued that any employee could have borrowed her credentials. Elena answered. Then, why did every disputed payment route through vendors your office approved during my hospital admission? Vivian looked toward Matteo. He did not answer for Elena. He told the chair. She finishes. The bank investigator joined by secure video and confirmed that the first false payment had settled into an account controlled by a company tied to Ferraro's nephew. City financial crimes officers entered with warrants covering the charity terminal. Vivian's devices. And the proxy files recovered from the destruction facility. Vivian did not confess. She called the case political and accused Elena of exploiting Matteo's guilt. Elena closed the ledger. My marriage is not evidence. Your access is... The officers removed Vivian from the voting table, froze the connected vendor accounts, and placed the remaining devices into independent custody. 3 council members surrendered their proxies. 2 requested counsel. The succession vote collapsed when the chair asked how the trust would continue. Several faces turned toward Matteo. He did not speak. Elena placed a proposed governance order beside the ledger. It separated the trust from his personal control, created independent bank oversight, and barred any family officer from revoking the audit director without an outside board vote. For 7 years. You called this his trust, while I kept your children in treatment, your widows housed, and your crews paid. She said, that pricing ends today. The hospital compliance chief confirmed Elena had designed the controls the bank still relied on. The bank investigator confirmed her intervention had preserved every legitimate obligation. The chair entered both findings into the permanent record and addressed her by title Director Elena Marconi. The recognition did not soften her demand. She required an independent budget, her own staff, outside audit authority, and a permanent veto over payment batches that failed beneficiary validation. The council approved the first 3 provisions. The veto required Matteo to surrender the last unilateral right attached to his position. He stepped to the table only after Elena invited him. Outside the chamber, officers escorted Vivian toward the elevator. Inside, every vote now depended on one signature. Matteo took the pen, read the surrender clause, and looked at Elena's bare hand. Matteo signed without asking what it would buy him. The final unilateral override moved from his office to the independent trust board, with Elena holding emergency veto authority until a permanent compliance panel was seated. She signed after the bank officer, not beside her husband. The order gave her a separate budget, authority to hire outside auditors, protection from dismissal by any DeLuca leader, and direct access to the bank and beneficiary council. Only then did she release the clean payments under review. By noon, every legitimate medical bill, widow benefit, and payroll bridge had cleared. The crisis ended without asking the families to pay for the council's failure. Vivian and Ferraro faced conspiracy, fraud, evidence tampering, and unlawful access charges through the city investigation. Their connected accounts remained frozen. Their council authority ended, and the vendors they had used entered receivership. Elena refused private retaliation. Consequences that depend on your anger can disappear with your mood. She told Matteo, "I want consequences that survive both of us." He issued a statement to the trust beneficiaries naming his own errors. He had removed Elena without operational review, given temporary power based on personal history, and allowed family status to outrank professional control. He did not call the betrayal love or claim pressure had forced him. He called it his decision. Elena began work at St. First. Catherine, on Monday. The hospital board approved a dual appointment, allowing her to serve as independent executive chair of the restructured DeLuca Family Trust while building a full operations team. She hired a bank compliance veteran, 2 beneficiary advocates, and a payroll manager who had once waited 3 days for the trust to correct his crew's wages. Every major payment required documented validation, but no family could be delayed because one powerful man lost a token. The nursery office became a beneficiary services center. The East Terminal was removed, imaged, and sealed as evidence. Elena never returned to work from the villa. Matteo moved into a townhouse across the river and sent his address through her lawyer. He cancelled the trackers attached to family vehicles, replaced the security chief who had obeyed unsigned orders, and gave Elena access to audit every protective measure affecting her or the baby. He did not appear at her apartment without permission. He attended medical appointments only when invited and sat where she asked him to sit. The first time he requested an update instead of demanding one. Elena noticed. She did not reward him for basic respect. She answered only the question he had earned the right to ask. 3 months later, the independent board held its first beneficiary meeting. A widow named Rosa thanked Elena for catching a payment error before it cancelled her insurance. A port captain admitted that most men in the organization had assumed Matteo's signature kept the trust alive. "We were wrong," he said. "Your work did." The board recorded Elena as founding architect of the new system and approved permanent funding for her staff. Public repricing became more than applause. Her name appeared on the governance charter, the bank mandate, and every annual report. Matteo sat in the second row without security, clearing a path for him. When the meeting ended, he waited until the families had spoken to her before approaching. "I owe you an apology with no request attached," he said. He named the nursery, the revoked badge, the medical framing, and the years he had accepted credit for systems he did not understand. "I treated control as care. I treated your labor as part of being my wife. I was wrong." Elena listened without making his relief her responsibility. Then she handed him a written relationship agreement prepared with counsel. Separate homes, no surveillance, no decisions about her work, body, travel, or medical care, no family secrets affecting her safety, permission before touch, the right to end any meeting, any courtship, or the marriage without punishment. Matteo read every line. "And the ring," he asked. "The old marriage does not return because you learned to apologize." Elena closed the folder. "You may court me again. Slowly. I may still say no." Matteo signed the agreement and placed the pen down. He did not reach for her hand. "Would you have coffee with me next Thursday?" She checked her calendar. Not his expression. 40 minutes. Public place. No security at the next table. His answer was immediate. Agreed. By spring, Elena and the baby were healthy, and the trust had passed its first independent audit. Matteo kept his distance when she asked, and showed up when invited. Some weeks she accepted coffee. Some weeks she did not. The choice remained hers. One evening, after a beneficiary dinner, she let him walk beside her to the hospital garden. When he asked whether he could hold her hand, Elena considered the man he had been, the structure he had changed, and the freedom still waiting behind her. Then she offered her hand on her own terms. Would you have stayed to save the people who depended on you, or taken the freedom you had finally earned?